Spider-Man, Spider-Man does whatever. Hello, I'm Dave, and I saw Amazing Spider-Man 2. It was fun, I really enjoyed it, and I've a feeling that the internet, and therefore possibly you, will hate it. To explain what I mean, I have to say something that might sound a bit rude. I don't mean it to be rude, but when I say it, it'll sound like I'm placing a divide between people like me who enjoyed the film and then people who didn't enjoy the film, which might be you, and it might sound like I'm making fun of those people, and I'm not. I'm honestly not. I'm just not clever enough to think of a better way of putting it. But I can set it up so that you know what I mean. There will be no spoilers here. No spoilers! I'm not even going to hint at spoilers. There'll be fewer spoilers in this video than in other videos and reviews you may have seen that are marked no spoilers. But I am going to talk about who the main villain is, the one on the posters and in the trailers. You know who I mean, and the film wants you to know who I mean. But just in case you don't know and you don't want even this spoiled, and just in case, as I say this to you now, you're off in the next room with washing up gloves on, elbow deep in a load of dirty dishes, like I often am when people on YouTube things that I happen to be listening to at the time start talking spoilers, and you need to get in here and somehow turn me off, but you can't because there's going to be water going everywhere and this is just not good. I'm going to talk about something else for a minute, just to give you a chance to rush in here and stop me from saying who the main villain is, but it's the one on the poster, it's not a spoiler. I enjoyed watching this film, but not so much where I don't agree with people's criticisms of it. There is one thing though that I'd rather stop hearing in every negative review of this film and its predecessor, and that's the criticism that the Amazing Spider-Man films aren't being made for any kind of credible artistic reason, but rather as a cold and calculated business move by Sony, who needed to keep hold of the license to the Spider-Man franchise and therefore needed to make a reboot film, rendering the whole series soulless. I understand this opinion, and I agree that it does make the whole thing sound empty when you put it like that. Unfortunate though it might feel, that's the way loads of our favourite films are made. It's not something that just happened with this one series. The obvious comparison, Sam Raimi's 2002 Spider-Man, wasn't the product of Raimi having a flash of inspiration one day. It was already in production years before he was hired into it. Another product of the ordinary practice in Hollywood of giant companies holding the license to a property and having a certain amount of time to legally make a film out of it before losing their investment, which several of them did before Sony happened to be holding the parcel when the music stopped. Or when they finally made a film out of it anyway. Of course there are directors who have the power to make any film they want for artistic reasons, and those films often turn out to be the better films, but a lot of the time, especially when you're talking about franchise films, they're all business decisions first, that gradually blossom into good films when put into the hands of the people hired specifically to make that happen. So let's criticise these films, but let's not be silly or anything. So, as I was saying, this film wants you to know who its main villain is. I was worried about having Electro be the villain here. I've never really cared about him before in previous incarnations of Spider-Man I've seen, and I was concerned that that would be the case here. And having seen the film, I'm still not sure. This wasn't a very well constructed character, but what it was overall was affecting. I listened to the film's soundtrack before I made this video. Don't do that, by the way. Don't listen to the soundtrack until you've seen the film, because it contains spoilers, and I'm not just talking about in the names of the tracks. And as I listened, I felt myself feeling this sense of dread for what's about to happen to Max. Even though in the film, it's not really scary or anything, it's kind of delightfully silly. The music stirs up this great sense of fate, both for Electro and the people who are about to get caught up in his wake, even though that's kind of at odds with the goofy cartoon character we're introduced to in the film. He's a cartoon drawing of a tragic, downtrodden figure, with his nobody notices me shtick already having been beaten by a genuinely moving scene early on in the Lego movie. Watch it, it's great. But he's also a Saturday morning depiction of a nerd, being intelligent enough to design intricate machinery that's never been conceived of before, while also being sort of stupid in a way that affects his life. And because he has that sort of unintelligent, quite obsessive side of himself, I've seen it criticised that this is a depiction of a person with a mental illness, vilified, which is a fair criticism. I don't think it's what they were going for. I think they were going for, he's just a bit stupid, but you know, we're making more superhero movies than ever before, but we're all tuned into the idea that just having someone be crazy and that makes them a bad guy that's not necessarily alright. When he gets his powers, they give us a glimpse at the rage he's already had, shouting silently in his head. And you wonder if, had there not been the accident, he might have bumbled his way into a workplace shooting somewhere down the line. And all of that could be fascinating and explored deeply, but remember, this is more of a cartoon drawing of that kind of character. It's a villain who, I can't help but think, if we saw the same dialogue and performance in one of the 90s superhero cartoons, like, say, Batman the Animated Series, or of course the Spider-Man one, then we would all say it was an impressively nuanced villain. But here, unless you're in the mood for silliness, you're likely to find it weak and a little too easy. Especially in the same film as Andrew Garfield, Emma Stone and Sally Field, giving us characters who surprise us again and again with how real they feel. I mean, that effect is lessened slightly slightly now that we're all used to them from the first film, when the gulf of difference between them and the rather nuance-free, cardboardy characters from the Raimi films, Dr. Octopus excluded, was at its most pronounced, but they're still here, and their performance hasn't been altered. These are the same characters we enjoyed in the first film. Max doesn't fit in with that, and you'll feel it, but once his intro scenes are done and he gets his powers, after that, you're not really called upon to think much about him beyond, oh, cool, and the film does deliver on that. Because for whatever weaknesses the character has, and they do depend on what mood you bring in with you to a certain extent, Electro as a cinematic presentation is a real experience. I'm not actually going to tell you what I mean by that exactly, because it's something of a spoiler. It's likely you've already heard about part of how they've done him, and maybe even scoffed at it, because on paper, it sounds a bit stupid. But there's more to it than you can really take in from someone just posting spoilers. Electro, to put it briefly, is something I've never seen done before in film. He is a villain who is displayed to us using everything the cinema has to offer. And that means sound just as much as it means visuals. The incidental music is laced with electricity. Electro exists in the circuitry around you in the cinema. And while the lightning effects are pleasantly realistic, bolts of lightning don't fly along like jagged spears in this film. They pulse in and out of view, already connected to their target, which is, you know, like lightning really does. The real star of the show is the sound. It's built out of everything from, like, bassy grinding sounds of musical Tesla coils, down to the quiet modem warbling that evokes electrical thought underpinning the quieter moments. And if you've heard a word used to describe the sound in Electro's scenes and it's putting you off, don't worry, they don't overplay it. In fact, I found myself wishing that the soundtrack would just let loose, but of course if Electro does that, then it's all over for everyone in a moment. I told you not to listen to the soundtrack though, please don't, until you've seen the film, because they've got one more trick up their sleeves which I'm not even going to hint at, which seems to have stayed out of the spoiler sphere because it's kind of drowned out by the talk about the other aspect I'm not mentioning, and it is, I think, unprecedented and quite exciting, and I wish they'd gone further with it. But if I was worried about Electro, I wasn't worried about Peter Parker, and I wasn't worried about Gwen Stacy. As far as I'm concerned, these two actors are perfect in the roles, but a friend of mine who hated Amazing Spider-Man 1 flagged up the difference between Andrew Garfield's Peter Parker and Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man. He was annoyed about one aspect of the hype surrounding the previous film in particular, the fact that we all celebrated a Spider-Man who quips as he fights, something that was sorely missing from the Sam Raimi films. As he pointed out, that quipping only actually happens in one scene in Amazing Spider-Man 1. Actually, it's two, but I know what he means. The dialogue in the fight towards the end of the film is less like spontaneous quipping and more like leafing through round-table scripted gags. There's more of it this time round. Spider-Man never just fights in this film. He jokes, he dances, he pauses the fight to stop a thrown car from hitting a pedestrian, and all the time he swings. The Raimi films and Amazing Spider-Man 1 alike teased us constantly with these brief shots, these short web-slinging moments that looked great but then returned us to the ground really quickly. Well, this film has you swinging with Spider-Man through the streets of the city for extended periods of time. It's finally all here. And not just swinging, he crawls, he skitters, this Spider-Man moves like Spider-Man, and you move with him. Or at least I did. I saw this film in IMAX 3D. Now 3D, of course, is such a divisive thing that I think it's better if I just put my cards on the table now and tell you what I think of 3D in general, so that you can decide what to take and what to discard from my review. I happen to reckon that part of the divide between people who like 3D cinema and think it works really well, and then the people who think it's a bad gimmick and it ought to just die a death, might be more of a physical divide than we generally acknowledge. I talk to people after seeing a 3D film who say that the 3D added nothing, or that it was dizzying or uncomfortable, or that you just didn't ever notice it, while I was sitting in the seat next to them and I was engulfed by the 3D. Well, I happen to be one of those people for whom 3D actually works, and by gosh, it really works. If you're one of those people like me, then this film does offer some stuff in 3D that would be lost without it. When you're swinging through the streets with Spider-Man, you will feel those streets around you. You'll swoop down and back up, and when Spider-Man voices his exhilaration about this, you'll know what he means. In 2D, you'd be looking at a picture of it. In 3D, you're doing it. But it isn't necessary. It's not one of those films. I can only think of about 2 films where I'd never recommend seeing it in 3D. 2D, I mean, I'd never recommend seeing them in 2D. Gravity is one of them for the sense of being lost in a great vast space, and the other one is the Lego Movie, which is all about invoking the sense of the toys you played with, and of course in 3D you physically see them spread out in front of you. This film would be fine in 2D, probably, but it was lovely in 3D. And this will have affected my opinion of the film. I'm not ashamed to admit that I enjoyed this film the way I would enjoy a theme park ride. It was a big, loud visual explosion. More IMAX experience than film, perhaps. There are 2 films happening here. The big, whooshy comic book explosion one, and then there's the dramatic one. In Amazing Spider-Man 1, the dramatic story was the winning side of the film. In this, it's the action film. Despite several really great dramatic scenes, and none that are done badly. It's just that in this film, those dramatic dramatic scenes do a commendable job of stitching together a story that isn't serious and doesn't need to be taken seriously. It's mad and silly and fun, and yes, that is slightly at odds with the tone of the first film. Many reviewers have found that these two tones clash with one another and have no real reason to want to contradict them on that. It's just that I've noticed recently when discussing films with friends who are much more thoughtful reviewers than I am, that I tend to watch films more in a kind of in-the-moment way, rather than with a bigger picture mindset. So from that perspective, each bit of the film, each individual bit, was good. And if they don't form a single flow like the best films do, then, well, if you need that to happen, then maybe this isn't your sort of film. So here we go. I think I've got you round to where you'll understand what I'm trying to say when I say this thing that might sound a bit rude. I'm not saying this with the usual scorn that people who say this say it with. I'm just saying it as a blanket statement without any judgment attached. Okay? So don't hate me. Here it is. If you hate fun... No, I know, but just hear me out, because the thing is, usually I'm on your side. The Nolan Batman films are my favourite superhero films too. I like airtight plotting and hard science as well. But another thing I like is cartoons, and I'll never fully let go of that. And this film is that, but with some genuinely dramatic moments. What this film reminds me more of than anything is a Marvel Heroes cartoon series, but where the overblown dramatic bits are done really well with really good actors, and the overblown action sequences are just mind-blowing. But many of you don't like that, and with good reason as well. You think that by making a live-action superhero film, the tone and the drama of the piece must be, for want of a better term, live action as well. It needs to be realistic and gritty and real. And in this film, it isn't. It isn't. So if you need it to be, you'll hate this. Stan Lee does not, in his brief cameo in this film, shout Excelsior the way he does. If he did, be honest, would you scoff and roll your eyes? If so, you probably won't like this film. If you cheer him on, you probably will. This film shouts Excelsior, but sometimes it shouts it in a stupid voice, like, oh, Excelsior! And what that means to me is that it was a ride. I had a lot of fun. You'll hear me saying fun over and over again. You'll be going, oh, I don't watch films to have fun. Don't watch it. This is a film that you watch for fun. That kind of thing, a film that's just, woo, fun, is stupid to loads of people for perfectly good reasons. And those people, when they watch this film, what they will see in it is Raimi's Spider-Man 3. They are similar. And if the things I've been describing about this film so far sound stupid to you, and you're wondering why I like those things, then you'd better know this. I liked Spider-Man 3. I'm not going to pretend it was a good film, Spider-Man 3, but the thing is that when I watched it, it just made me laugh. And I think it intended to, and I certainly didn't begrudge it. But most people did. Most cleverer people than me thought that a cartoon tone and a comedy sequence starring a strutting, increasingly overconfident Peter Parker and a delicious pie do not mesh with their idea of what a Spider-Man film should be. And there's no reason to argue with them about that. But I guess back then, I just happened to tune into the idea of a bonkers overblown cartoon as relief from the overwrought drama of the previous film. Well, anyway, this film does that. It's daft. And it's daft in a way that, depending on who you are and what your opinion of superheroes is, and what mood you happen to be in that day, is either going to be tons of fun or completely unacceptable. So this is my warning to you, basically. This is a film that is going to lose something when it isn't presented as a kind of IMAX superhero thrill ride. And if that sounds rubbish to you, then maybe you shouldn't see it. If you hate fun, don't watch this film.
Please note that it doesn't work the other way around, and that not liking this film does not imply you hate fun.
Right, well, I'm losing the light, so I'll wrap up there. I will do a video talking about some of the spoilers later on. I think I'll wait until it's out in America, just to be fair, and it'll be full of spoiler warnings. In the meantime, if you haven't seen the film yet, but you're watching reviews, as you seem to be, watch out, because I've seen a few reviews, usually the negative reviews, you know, the sort I mean, the negativity as performance, that sort of review, which are quick to bandy about the spoilers, even though they're marked as spoiler-free. And they can get away with it, because they don't say the spoilers exactly, but they tell you about the kind of category of spoiler to the point where you could easily guess what they're talking about. Oh, there's one more thing I've thought of that I ought to warn you about, because it might make this film the kind of film you don't like. Amazing Spider-Man is now unequivocally a series. This is part of a larger series, of the way the Marvel films are. Sony seem to be building this into their version of the Marvel Avengers movie universe. And as a concept, that's alright by me, but it does mean that this film has that kind of open-ended part 2 of 7 feel that some of the Avengers movies do as well. This film has some stuff in it that's only there to set up for future episodes, so bear that in mind. And now, before I go, I'll address a few little things that I was wondering about before I saw the film. As these are little questions about things that I saw in the trailer or that I wanted to see picked up from the previous film, I'll warn you that I'm not going to be answering any of the questions with actual spoilers, but if you're the sort of person who doesn't even watch a trailer, I don't know why you're watching this video, but if you are, then, you know, you might switch me off now if you like. Question 1. Is this film the villain-crammed mess that the trailer suggests? No, it isn't. The trailer straight up lied. It lied in a way that I'd like to talk about, but it would be kind of spoilery, so I guess I'll save that for the next video. But no, it isn't. A little bit, but not in the way the trailer suggested anyway. Question 2. Does this film pick up the dropped ends of the Parker family story that were cut from the first film? Yes, it does! It would have been more satisfying to see it back then, and this aspect of the story does feel a bit small inside the general sprawl of this film, but you can see why they did it. In the first film, it was established that Peter's dad was doing experiments, and that serves as a useful foundation for any amount of Spider-Man lore that they might want to introduce. So to have this film happen without mentioning that, or even if it was mentioned but just delivered as a recap of the first film, it might have made this film seem a little bit like it didn't have an underlying foundational sort of backstory to it. So it's good that we get to hear about it again here, but also they add extra little details to it which tell you why they were going with this angle in the first place. So you find out why his father's work is relevant to the overall story. And yes, it's more storytelling than it is scientifically sensible, but I think we've established that's where we are with this film. It's not as nonsensical as Iron Man 2's big schlock science moment, for example. Question 3. Do we find out who the mysterious shadowy figure from the mid-credits sequence in Amazing Spider-Man 1 was? Not really? Yeah, sort of. No? Question 4. Is Norman Osborn in this film? That'd be a spoiler, wouldn't it? That'd be a spoiler, wouldn't it? So there we go, Amazing Spider-Man 2. It's bonkers, it's silly, you might like it, you might hate it. I don't know. I liked it though, I thought it was fun, I thought it was silly. If that's what you're looking for, a crazy, silly cartoon episode, then you probably like this. If what you're looking for is a deadly serious Nolan-esque film, you won't get it. This film does not skew in that direction, it skews silly. It skews Spider-Man 3. It does, so be warned about that. Ish, sorta. If Spider-Man 3 was good, I think it was good, but a lot of people don't. A lot of people do. I don't know whether you'll like this, but I did. Bye! Oh, that's gone cold. That's gone cold.